Welcome to Trash Talk, a podcast by Zero Waste Canada. I'm your host, Alistair McCallum. I moved to Canada in 2017 from England, and I've since held a variety of roles in the waste industry. I'm currently sit on the Zero Waste Canada board. On this podcast, we will dive deep into the world of zero waste and the circular economy, speaking with change makers who are helping to lead us to a more waste-free, sustainable planet. I'm excited to record this episode just based on bringing two passions of mine together in zero waste and music. When I moved out to Ontario, I've seen several bands that I haven't seen for a while. Green Day, Blink-182, Simple Plan, and then most recently one of Sum 41's last ever shows, and that was all in 2024, not 2004. Those bands go back a long way, and yeah, what can I say? It's a lifestyle, not just a phase. Let's get into it. Iman, welcome. This is episode number 4 of Trash Talk. Thanks for being here today. Let's start with your background in ESG and kind of what led to your current role and your career pathway.
Sure. So I have quite a bit of an extensive history in ESG. Back in my time at Queen's, I started out by wanting to be a doctor and, becoming familiar with the connections of how life sciences really is embedded into environmental sciences was something that I grew to be passionate about. And so what happened from there is that I really wanted to take charge in the social space and really grow my understanding of social impact. So I helped run several nonprofits as a part of campus, like Free the Children, and specifically a nonprofit that helped give students alternatives to common household items that were environmentally sustainable at no cost. So all of these initiatives really kind of started having me think about the impact of sustainability. And from there, I decided I wasn't fed up with school. So I wanted to complete my MES. And so from there, I completed my master's of environment and sustainability at Western the following year in 2019. And so through that kind of school experience, I was able to obviously get the theoretical knowledge of ESG and all of that good stuff. But it was through my first co-op that I had at Budweiser Stage, where I was the first venue sustainability coordinator, that really set it apart for me in terms of what I wanted to do and be able to drive that path. So within that role, I learned a lot about the value of sustainability within, a business operation. Like even you wouldn't expect a music industry to have some sort of sustainable operation, but it did. So I learned a lot about waste, energy consumption, water consumption, and even something as small as employee engagement, and how all of that really pertains to what we were trying to do and how we were really trying to push the idea that sustainability belongs in live music. So it was fantastic that I got that opportunity and we were able to make headway in the first year. However, it was 2018 and then the infamous pandemic hit. So on my way back to Live Nation, I had to do some rejigging in terms of my career because obviously the live music industry was impacted. So from there, I decided to take kind of my curiosity around specifically end of life cycle analysis and understand how that really says something to an organization from a cost and legal perspective. So I ended up working at a waste consultant company where I learned a lot about kind of that provincial and regulatory piece. And from there, I was really able to understand, why something like end of life matters to companies, especially those that have multiple properties. I will say that throughout that time, I did a lot of deep diving in waste. And so for me, I had felt that I wanted to really switch my gears. So from there, I actually ended up working in a contract position at Johnson Controls. roles where I actually was the sustainability awareness manager for several of our government clients on what are called energy performance contracts. So through that entire project, essentially what my role was to really work with the different communities and actually help them and understand why the government was pushing these energy performance measures to really improve not only like the energy efficiency side of things, but also improve the life cycle of the objects on site,
Yeah.
the buildings on site, and to hopefully sustain the communities that lived there. So really, that was an interesting role for me because it was a lot of community involvement, really understanding how to connect something as, far beyond as sustainability in the eyes of military folks who don't necessarily think about that day in, day out. So that was my kind of experience in that position. And then from there, I got offered a role at managing Technion, which is a company that does furniture and actually sells furniture. But they actually have a kind of small part of their program that's focused on what happens when customers no longer want their furniture. And so my role within that company was to manage that, what we call decommissioning process
Yeah.
for all of the big companies across Technion's portfolio. And that program was called Divert. And the essence of it was how do we find valuable ways of showing customers, especially ones that were coming out of the pandemic that needed to shrink their office spaces, but wanted to do so in a way that was not impactful to their organization, how we could recycle, resell, or donate their furniture, and then issue them the scope 3 reporting for that specific piece. So all of that to say, I ended up coming back to Live Nation just purely because of my interest and kind of my drive to want to be here in the industry as it kind of oversees all these wonderful changes. So in this role that I'm currently in, I am the national sustainability manager of all of our operated and owned venues and festivals. So really what that means is I focus on the strategy side of how we get to reducing the waste that you see at all of our live music venues. How do we report on the value of what we're doing at our different venues and festivals, and how we engage with audiences to help them really understand the impact of sustainability in the live music business. So, hope that summarizes it enough, but in a nutshell.
Amazing, yeah. So it wasn't like just a waste. You were kind of got input from other areas of ESG and kind of broadened your like knowledge and I guess kind of skills in different areas too, which is great to kind of have that well-rounded kind of insight into other areas too, which is awesome. That's what I'm looking to do now as well, because I've been in waste kind of solely for 7 years and a bit. So looking forward to learning more about other areas too and how that can also impact waste and ESG reporting and
Hmm.
everything. So yeah, it's good to have that well-rounded kind of knowledge. Yeah.
Yes, and it becomes very tedious working in waste for very long. And there are definitely cases where I'm known as the waste girl, which is
Yeah.
hilarious, but it definitely is a very large part of sustainability, but not
Yeah.
everything is sustainability.
Yeah, you were saying you like deep dive into waste, and I get an image of like just diving into dumpsters because that's what I've done many times, maybe in the past of like going in and physically looking at what's in and getting feedback and like data on what should and shouldn't go in bins and like, physically climbing in to even get that
Yeah.
data sometimes too. So yeah, it can be a messy industry in many ways sometimes.
Oh, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. So can you speak to what your current kind of goals are with waste and ESG and how that is kind of playing into your strategy at venues you're managing and kind of what the overall aims are with your
Sure.
current programs? Yeah.
So I'll give you a bit of history, just because Live Nation for the past, 6, 7 years has been doing fantastic things around instituting sustainable operations.
Yep.
And so it actually, in 2019, the Live Nation Entertainment Organization actually instituted the creation of what's called the Green Nation Charter. And so this is what really helps set out several different standards for what we see in the industry for how we as an organization assess across our sustainable initiatives. So, having goals set in place around reducing waste, carbon emissions, energy use, and even having goals as far-fetched as reducing single-use plastics at our events allow us to really drive the narrative of what we believe is going to really make a difference operationally at our venues. So, realistically, across all of our different venues, we have done several different initiatives. I'll use our example, I like to call it our landmark example, Budweiser Stage, because the team there is fantastic and have instituted several initiatives to make sure sustainability is top priority there. But at Budweiser Stage, we have a dedicated green team. And so what they focus on is they actually focus on sorting and collecting the different types of waste streams that you as a fan would just throw out, not necessarily thinking of kind of when you're actually at the venue. And so what's really fantastic is that, to your point earlier about, getting in the nitty-gritty of the waste, these green team individuals are actually able to do so. And in doing so, they're able to really facilitate not only education, but they're also able to understand from the different lens, from the visual perspective, what exactly is coming through our waste streams. So that's a really great example of an initiative we're doing at Budweiser Stage. And through that initiative, we've been able to divert several hundreds of metric tons of waste throughout the years. And I think really having that capacity to actually say that Budweiser Stage is doing its part to divert waste is fantastic, and that's why I say it's one of our landmark venues in Canada. So with that being said, obviously, we do follow the Live Nation Global Sustainability Charter. And so, for me, what that looks like in terms of my strategic planning is how can we get all of those venues to that point that Budweiser Stage is at? And so, what we're looking to do is implement significant sustainability efforts at the other venues where we're hoping to kind of do one of two things. The first is to obviously establish the baseline, understand what we're doing, what's the waste consumption like, what's the energy consumption like, and also understand what the challenges are to really being able to bridge those gaps. So that's kind of the first thing. And then the second thing is once we're able to establish those baselines and establish those challenges, how can we do our part as the parent organization to achieve, a 50% waste diversion at minimum for all of these venues across Canada? And obviously there is a provincial and, legislation that's going to push that narrative as we continue into 2030. But I do think that we also need to be doing our part to launch awareness campaigns and educating fans, artists, and staff about the value of sustainable practices when they're on site. So really, as I said, Budweiser Stage is kind of the bread and butter, in my opinion, in Canadian venues of what we're hoping to achieve from the sustainable operations side. But it also is coming through not just from the venue operations, but also from artists and from production teams as well. So I think that, from the perspective of where we're heading, I think really having sustainability be a driver for how we actually operate our shows and our festivals is going to continue to be the strongest, I would say, program and implementation that we're moving forward with.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
I have like two questions on that. So what items are commonly like categorized in bins from consumers you're seeing? And then second part of that, like what are some easy wins you're seeing in terms of like taking a more zero waste approach? What are some items that can straight away get changed out for reusables, for example? So what are the kind of common things you're seeing that aren't working well? And then what are the kind of quick wins that you're kind of implementing to get that reduction in waste you're talking about?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So I think that a couple things that come down the pipeline initially is the idea of contamination. I think that oftentimes what a lot of people don't realize is the fan is really responsible for how the waste kind of maneuvers throughout to the back of house where it gets sorted. And in the situation where, oftentimes people are drinking, sometimes people aren't necessarily paying attention, or sometimes in the case of some of our venues, there's only a garbage bin available front of house. So people will always, in my experience, just place the item in the closest receptacle. And so that's almost why we've instituted the green team being back of house, is because we know that from a fan behavior perspective, there's only so much we can do to drive them to use the correct bin. And oftentimes, I've noticed that a lot of time people love stuffing things into their cups. So
Right.
they'll order like a million things of food, and then all the wrappers will go into the cup, and then the cup will go into the garbage, which is fine. But that's really why we have that kind of back of house team, because they are the ones physically sorting that material so that that plastic cup, if it does need to go into the garbage, is able to. But if it is, clean and is able to be recycled, then that is something that we would actually implement.
Just on single use, what's your strategy in terms of changing out from hard to recycle items into reuse or compostable, for example?
We actually at Budweiser stage have done, to your point, a lot of things to change common items like serviceware, like cups and containers for food, into entirely compostable serviceware. And the reason we've done that is because we are trying to reduce the amount of single use that actually gets through to recycle or to the recycling. But as we know in this industry, recycling rates are so low in Ontario and especially across Canada. So the intention is, how do we look at our materials and move away from having to send them through to the hauler to be processed, and rather are able to divert it directly on site. And so that's something that is a really fantastic story with Budweiser Stage, is a lot of the vendors and a lot of the artists have supported the switch to compostable serviceware, because they see the value not just from a purchasing perspective, but from an end of operations waste cost perspective as well. So I would say that that's probably one of the biggest material switches that we've done. And also, we've completely eliminated single-use plastic bottles from our sites, again in a hopes to actually reduce the need for people to have to come onto site to buy water bottles. They can buy an alternative, whether it's a drink or any sort of other different type of beverage, and then they actually have the opportunity at Budweiser stage to utilize the dispenser, the water refill stations, excuse me, which again promote less consumption on site and more reuse and reusability. So that's, at least for us, some of the biggest material switches that we're hoping to institute across all of our venues.
Amazing. Yeah, it's good
Yeah.
to hear. Yeah, because
Yeah.
compostable is a big shift. I know options that are like good to reuse is also, yeah, a very kind of key thing as well. So those two items are great to see happening. And one question I was going to bring up on this point as well is that there's vendors I know that are kind of working in this space on reuse in particular, and they're seeing good return rates. So is that an area you're looking into beyond compostables and like single use, reusable containers? Is there a way to kind of use vendors like that more broadly for kind of all packaging on venues, for example? Is there like, yeah, scope to increase that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So actually, in our US counterparts, we do have some venues who utilize reusable containers and serviceware. So our intention is to definitely assess it for each venue where we can, especially those that do have a really, really robust food and beverage, specifically beverage portfolio, I would say more specifically. But it is definitely on our radar, and our hope is to definitely integrate reusable cups wherever wherever possible. It is also something that is driven a lot by the artist. So
Yeah.
that is something that is part of that education piece that we talked about, is educating artists and productions of the value of reusable alternatives like reusable cups. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. And you mentioned before about how artists are kind of key to this growth as well. So my question is kind of like what is their input into these programs? So are they kind of supporting? Are they driving? Are you looking to engage more artists to like promote campaigns, for example? So yeah, what's the kind of like next step with artists getting involved in these programs and pushing them forward even more?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And it's one that I even myself am trying to kind of innovate and think of as I'm in this role. I would say that as a concert goer myself, and as somebody who really is a big live music fan, fans are always inspired by artists who advocate for what they believe in and for those that believe in similar things to their fans. And so, really, I think a fantastic example is through Coldplay and through Billie Eilish and through their events. Recently, I was able to go to a event in San Jose for Billie Eilish, and she was able to have entirely locally sourced plant-based menu options for the venue. Like, you were not able to buy any meat on site. And that was fantastic because that's stuff that we do have here. We do offer plant-based menu options across many of our venues. And that is something that is oftentimes, again, artist driven, but for her to push the narrative around how it was going to be the only option is something that is becoming more and more like relevant in the artist and music world, because again, they're showing preference for
Mhm.
events that reflect eco-friendly practices. There's a bunch of different reports out just around how live music fans engage in climate change issues. And I do think that, just speaking very broadly about different artists like Shawn Mendes and Billie Eilish, who have nonprofits supporting the climate change issue, and even more so advocating on the public education of climate change, is something that is really showing through in their requests for how they show up on site. I believe there's a stat that shows around 72%, I think it's 72% of fans will consider climate change important when attending a festival. And
Mm.
around 76% of fans are also likely to take environmental or climate change action if they see their favorite artists doing so as well. So I think that it's almost it's coming through the conversation around how do we continue to drive the narrative of what environmentalism means to us? How do we continue to promote climate change in an industry where it's not always talked about? And I think it really just begins with the very simple things. So what I mean by that is something as small as eliminating single-use plastics, all the way to offering, like what Billy did, plant-based alternatives only for fans. All of this promotes a culture of shared responsibility. And that's really why I got into this industry, because I think that in the live music space, you can really see the value of how shared responsibility drives narrative and drives sales and drives change, especially in this space. And because Live Nation is such a big, industry leader, and especially I would say from the space of sustainability, we are always looking at ways to reduce our operational footprint and minimize our carbon emissions. And by doing so, investing more and more into the artist and the production and the tour side. So I think that really it becomes kind of a circular process, and a lot of it does start with education.
Mm.
But really, what it really boils down to is how, as a community, we can say sustainability makes a difference in live music. And unfortunately, I don't have a million fans following me around everywhere in my position. However, I think that with folks like Billie Eilish, Shawn Mendes, John Mayer, pushing that narrative, you're going to start to see more and more folks talking about it and bringing it up as a part of how they utilize their money and how they spend their time outside of work. So
Yeah.
I personally think that it's a very fantastic space to be in. It's an exciting space to be in. And I think for at least my perspective, a lot of it is going to be driven by the artists and the fans, not so much, in my opinion, from the government side. I do think that government and legislation have a lot to do with the space, but inevitably it's the folks that are coming to these concerts that are experiencing the sustainable value of these concerts, that are really going to be pushing the narrative forward.
Yeah, some really great points. Yeah, I think your stat on the fans, the fan engagement with ESG initiatives was really important. How yeah, fans can help drive these changes because they're the ones, yeah, paying for these events like overall, and then they're the ones coming to them. So if the artists, yeah, are engaging in what the fans are looking for and driving these things forwards, that's a really great thing to see happening. And I was thinking back to older podcasts where Cody from Sharewares had an image of Taylor Swift like holding up a reusable cup and what that could do for the industry in terms of someone like that standing. You mentioned lots of artists earlier as well with massive followings. So yeah, like having these people with these yeah like large fan bases, if they can engage with them on these kind of things happening at concert spaces and yeah, helping really kind of bring fan engagement on these initiatives further and bring the awareness even more, then that's going to help, I guess, your job in terms of bring them into practice, right? So yeah, I'd like getting the artists on board is a very key thing. What you're saying, I guess, in how to yeah bring these things to the next level and scale them up. So
Yeah, and for Rogers Stadium, actually, that's really our intention. So I apologize, I didn't talk a lot about Rogers Stadium because
yeah,
I'm not always too sure what I can and cannot say. But I'm gonna go
right.
ahead and say it anyways.
Yeah.
So the part that I will speak to is for the stadium that we have that's opening this year, we do
Mm.
have a very large run of shows that are Coldplay specific. And I mentioned Coldplay a couple different times.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think is fantastic is that what we're hoping to do for those Coldplay shows is implement the Live Nation Green Touring guidelines, which really are extremely robust to the very small, like detailed level of the number of bins you are allowed on site, of exactly how we are going to make this concert sustainable. And I really implore a lot of people to look into Coldplay. They actually release an ESG report every single year, which I find
Mm.
fantastic
Yeah.
and really educational just on the impact. But just so that, folks know that with the growing demand for venues and the growing demand for shows, things like a Live Nation Green Touring guideline will really help impose those operational boundaries so that we can encompass, efficient routes for all the things we talked about and make that the forefront of how we continue to grow in this industry. So I really think it's definitely artist driven,
Yeah.
but fans and the organization Live Nation in general is extremely valued in this space because of the amount of energy that they've invested into
Mm.
Green Nation and also just the overall value that Green Nation has brought globally, not just in Canada, to all of the different venues and festivals speaks volumes above what we're hoping to have achieved in Canada. So we are essentially following suit to what the overall company is doing in this space, using the US and the UK as really great practices for how we can implement these policies and programs. But I think what separates the Canadian version a little bit is that we are also unique in that we do have a lot of fans who are especially familiar with climate change in Canada. I would say based off of conversations I've had, people have been in conversations with other folks where they've maybe not gone to a concert because of it's flooding outside, or it's snowing and icing. And so the impact of climate change is something that tends to really not get brought up in this space a lot,
Yeah.
but you will probably know somebody who has been displaced by climate change, and in terms of not going to a concert because of it. So I think in Canada we are definitely uniquely tailored to understanding the impact of sustainable operations in this industry. I just think that from a legislation side, there hasn't been that much of a push yet. And so once it's kind of legislative in writing that we need to be able to do all of these initiatives and also reduce our zero waste, zero plastics rule, I think that that ultimately is going to really be when we'll see the most amount of success. I
Awesome.
hope that makes sense because I know it's a lot of back and forth.
Makes sense. So yeah, I think it's good to kind of like, yeah, you're saying you want to kind of see some more changes on the policy side to help again drive things that you're implementing further. And yeah, rather than just kind of like you yourself and artists like leading these things, it should be more like government
Hmm.
help to kind of yeah get to the next step rather than kind of yeah, from the ground up, more of a kind of government led, like here's the regulations, here's the rules, that will help
Yes.
again, more, yeah, drive these things even further. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, I think that in a lot of the sustainable businesses that I've worked in and that I've kind of coincidingly consulted with, oftentimes this is the case, right? Is the fans or the clients are the ones driving the narrative. And I think that in a space like live music where people aren't, sustainability isn't the top thing that they're thinking about, right? It's the concert experience. So oftentimes you kind of need to realize that sustainable operations isn't always top of mind to folks.
absolutely. Yeah, great points. I think with waste too, the unfortunate thing is that regulation can be quite slow to come in. Looking at the plastic ban, for example, single-use plastic ban that's been kind of going back and forth, and the different kind of regulations in different provinces taking time to get through. So yeah, there's going to be kind of changes coming. Hopefully, that are good changes, but yeah, these things seem to take time. So Iman, thanks so much for your time today. Great to speak with you and yeah, talk all things trash. Looking forward to reconnecting in the future, maybe after festival season this spring summer, and yeah, kind of reconnect on how things have gone and any kind of cool things that have happened on the waste side, and yeah, share some results and findings that you found from your Coldplay run. So yeah, looking forward to that.